Well. Here we are now. 6 points clear at the top of the SPFL. What a week it has been. Welcome along to the Huddle Breakdown and the call here in the company of Chico James. How are you?
I'm recovering. You said it was a great week, and it is in one aspect. The other aspect is that I was bedridden for 2 to 3 days with some fluish type creature. So rub it in, why don't you? When you're all out there celebrating, having fun, and I was hurling. Last week was bad with all of my description of bodily excrement, and this was an even worse week in reality. So
Well, we won't go
I'm
into that.
happy to be back amongst the living and celebrating because I couldn't do it when it should have been happening.
Yeah, we were going to bring the podcast to you a little bit earlier this week on Tuesday, but James was feeling under the weather, so we thought we may as well do it with the dream team of three rather than me and Alan powering on. Alan Morrison, Celtic by Numbers. How are you getting on?
Yeah, very good. And I do need to apologise. I have been showing ridiculous amounts of Schadenfreude, smugness all week to all those that have been pissed off by it. I apologise.
If not now, when, Alan? If not now, when?
But I do feel this could prove to be quite a important result.
Well, don't back down, double down. That's what they say.
We got an hour, haven't we? So let's see.
Right. Well, I mean, it is what it is. Celtic have beaten Rangers at Ibrox. The 12-point swing is completed. Celtic are 6 points ahead in the SPFL title race. The split is happening next week. So we have 6 games left to secure the title after what was a disastrous season last year. It has been said many times, but it cannot be said enough how much of a turnaround this season has been and how different it feels and the connection with the team in comparison to last year and just the general feeling around the team and the manager and the players. It really has been reinvigorated completely since last year. So we'll do our best to pick our way through this game. We've had a long time to kind of think about it and get our general theories about what went well, what didn't go well for Celtic. First off, Alan, I mean, what did go well? Celtic won the game, and Celtic won the game by playing a different type of football that we've been used to under Ange Postecoglou. It was a defensive performance. It was a solid performance, and it was one where Celtic were unashamedly compact, essentially.
In the second half. I mean, I'm going to do a little tactical piece, which I think will be up on my site. I think so, which really sort of describes the game in the classic three-act arc, whereby the first act is the first 7 minutes, which were almost disastrous, actually, terrible. And then the second act, which was the rest of the first half, which was actually Celtic playing the way that we have become accustomed to them playing. Really asserting hegemony over the game, but with a few little tactical nuances which we'll cover. And then the final act, as what you alluded to, was the second half, where it was more of a defensive performance, but again, in a way which we've not really seen, and again, further redefines what our perceptions of Murderball might or might not be. So I thought it was fascinating from that respect, and it's great to look back on it, because at the time I was just sat there like rigid with fear, of what was going to happen and tense. But to actually look back on the game as with a wee bit of distance behind us is great, and there's a lot to go at, I think.
Yeah, big time. Well, I was watching this before the wedding, pre-wedding, as I said on the review or the preview podcast.
Congratulations!
Well, it wasn't me. It wasn't my big day.
You weren't invited, James. We had a great time.
Well, here's the thing. I actually I should have told my story at the start of the podcast rather than going into it now. But I'll tell it now. Arrived at the hotel ready to watch the game. I was already suited and booted. The hotel didn't have the game on. They didn't, and they had the restaurant/bar closed off for Carvery. So I was like, this is a disaster. I went up to the groom's room, and I was getting ready in the groom's room with the groomsmen and all that. I wasn't part of the bridal party, and I was more nervous. Genuinely, I was more nervous about the day than the groom was about getting married later on that day. That's how nervous I was. Eventually got the game on in the hotel and was watching it back and forth to the guests and the match. And I was too nervous to watch the game when Celtic were winning 2-1 and I was too nervous not to watch the game. So every time I went over to speak to someone, I had to get immediately back to the TV. Every time I was at the TV, I wanted to leave because it was just it was so tense. But James, I actually missed the first 7 or 8 minutes, so I missed the Rangers dominance per se.
So it
What
was your
your
fault.
thoughts
Good
at
job.
that point? Yeah, well, that's it.
Well, first of all, to echo Alan's point, I mean, this was like a tectonic plate shifting kind of result. So let's start there. A lot of what we'll talk about subsequently relative to the minutia of performance, probably going to disagree a little bit with Alan on the first half, is inconsequential relative to the importance of what actually ended up happening. So how and the whys are, analytically interesting, but the big picture stuff's much more important and to be celebrated, quite frankly.
Yeah.
So I think that the first half in general echoed a lot of AZ Alkmaar, the way of performance at Alkmaar, and a lot of the underlying stuff kind of echoes that when I do my benchmarking and I go through stuff, even in a feverish state. That's the game that kind of leapt out to me. And if I just go back to memory, obviously the personnel were different, and the opponent different, but the way the game went in the first half, I thought was analogous, with that first 7 to 8 minutes being potentially calamitous. And I think probably my takeaway from the game is that we got positive variance on a few occasions, which helped. That was big time help, right? We had a couple of instances of individual brilliance, particularly on the first goal with McGregor. The finishes by Carter Vickers and Rogic were great. But Rangers were just really bad in certain ways. And the first half, I counted, I think it was, and again, I was in and out of consciousness at times. So I think I got up to 14-4. I kind of did it as like an attacking platform metric that I do. That's kind of conceptual. I do it conceptually. I don't, I don't document it like Alan does with his documentation of stats, but there were 14 separate sequences of play where if Rangers just weren't shit, they could have created a really good opportunity, right? There was the chance where Taylor got tracked back and took the ball off Aribo because Aribo had a horrible touch. There was a tremendous cross ball to Tavernier that he muffed that turned into a good cross to the back post that was like a foot away from being a tap in for Kent, right? There was a lot of that just fine margin type of stuff in that first half, even outside of the first 7 to 8 minutes, where I felt like, I think relative to how Ange came out in the second half, a little bit out of character, I think a lot of people would say. I think that may have been as a result of the fact that, we had our moments in the first half, but generally speaking, I think outside of some really poor individual decisions and some one really dumb selection, I think, on the part of their manager, I think that, it was I think we were in good stead to be up 2-1 going into the half. And I think Ange smartly came out looking to manage the game and just kind of finish it off. Because again, I saw a lot of things where if they just had a couple of improvements and if they'd made one tactical switch with personnel, could have been a big difference. And so that's kind of my read of the first 7 to 8 minutes. It was, we all kind of walk away with the glow, but we couldn't get the ball out of our half to a large degree, and the passing was a train wreck. And a lot of the stuff that I've talked about in the last couple of months, as far as if there was an opponent that finally schemed domestically to try and push us in certain ways, that I was worried about it. And they just had the wrong personnel in a couple of spots, or else, and they made, some of these bad decisions, or had, lacking individual quality on some specific phases of play. Or else, that could have easily been 3-4-0 in the first 10, 15 minutes. So
one shot.
Well, I agree, Alan. That's what I'm saying. You know, stuff where if Tavernier just simply gets the ball down and doesn't boot it, right? They had a 3-on-2 with the whole side of the field cleared out.
Yeah, but the point is that from that, in that 7 minutes, they had one shot, which was well worked goal, which was the result of Celtic being completely disorganized, which we'll come to, right? But the point, the other way of looking at this is the point that I made before the game, which is, where are they most lacking? They're most lacking in creativity, and creativity is a big subject, right? But creativity means the cross isn't 2 yards too high or a yard wide of the guy. Creativity means you see the pass to the guy that's in space and you give it, right? So that's their weakness. They don't have enough creative players in the final third, and they compounded that by playing the Jack and Lundstrom and Aribo. None of them are particularly creative. Both Aribo and Kent are very good at ball carrying, not so good at playing subtle creative passes. Okay, and they didn't really get the ball to Ramsey very much in areas where he could hurt Celtic.
Well, when he did, he was awful. Ramsey was awful. He was the selection that probably sunk the game for them.
So basically, I agree with what you're saying, is that there was opportunities, but they weren't good enough to take them because they're lacking in those areas, and therefore they didn't deserve to win the game in that respect.
Again, I'm not talking about deserve. What I'm saying is that, in my judgment, the way that we played in that first half was not good, and that whether it's pressure, whether it's whatever the forces that were at play, you're right. They are not as creative, and they do have deficiencies in that regard. But even with having said that, the margins on some of this stuff where they could have turned into really big chances, and I'm not saying like small chances or kind of chance. This is what I've been saying over and over again, where this is how Bodo Glimt scores 5-1 in 2 ties, where they took those kind of chances. The space was there, the opportunities were there. Like this was the 15 to 20 minutes against Betis and Leverkusen, where they dialed it up and ripped us apart. Like I saw the same kind of space available, where you're right, they absolutely didn't capitalize on it. What I'm saying is it was there to be capitalized on.
Yeah,
and I'm not just the first 7 or 8 minutes. I think it was the whole first half.
Okay, but some of that was by design, and we can argue that it was the wrong approach. But what Postecoglou tried to do, which was brave and actually cost us the first goal, was he pushed Rogic right up. Right, Rogic was probably in most of the first half. Rogic was the highest Celtic player on the field, and he was very central. So he was essentially playing 2 centre forwards, and he had Jota and Maeda pressing on the wings as well. So it was effectively a 4-2-4 out of possession. It was a 4-2-4. Okay, now that went wrong for the goal, because what happened was Rogic got caught high, but then the whole team was, I think it was literally, they were asleep, right? So when the ball got switched, the spacing was wrong. There was a big gap where the right side of number 8, which should have been Rogic in defence. I agree, Rogic should have been high when we're attacking, when we're pressing them from deep. But when we're defending our own area, Rogic should fall back into that 8 position. And there was a huge gap there. But even if Rogic had been there, the spacing was all wrong, and there was an enormous amount of space for them to play through for the goal. So so the system went wrong there. There was a systemic breakdown, and then Juranovic lets Kent run off him. So there's 3 things going wrong there again, and I guess what, it's a goal. Okay,
Juranovic was about 5 yards too high as well.
He was, but what the positive of that approach of pushing Rogic right up, what they were trying to do, I think, is they were trying to stop Rangers building the play through Jack and Lundstrom, who are both excellent deep progressors off the ball. And if you look at the data from the game, they hardly had a chance to play passes through Celtic. Celtic pushed them wide, which is quite brave, because Tavernier is their most creative player, and Bassi actually had a really good game. They were trying to stop Jack and Lundstrom getting on the ball in deep positions, and it worked. And actually, the other aspect of it was that the only player in the field that was able to find space consistently in that first half was Rogic. Okay, and he was the most dangerous player on the field. He had the most shots. He was in the box more than anyone else. He had the highest personal XG. So so net, it worked in this game. Now, your more general point is the same point you've been making rightly a number of times throughout the season, which is this doesn't scale to the quality of opposition like Leverkusen, and that is also correct. Yeah, so those two things are both correct, I believe.
Right. Yeah, my bigger point is that I think it had their manager just tweak things a little bit, it wouldn't have scaled against them. Meaning that, I think we were, and again, the fact that Ange did what he did in the second half, I mean, that is a different. I mean, he didn't do it with 15 minutes to go. He didn't do it with 20 minutes to go. I mean, we came out in the second half and basically it was like, okay. And I see that as potential validation of that he may have been uncomfortable with what was going on too. I mean, there was a lot of space, and again, to our credit, we were able to prevent them in many ways in capitalizing on it and this quality deficit and creativity. But I mean, if they just hadn't played Ramsey, that alone, I mean, he was awful. I mean,
but without Morelos and with Jack and Lundstrom and Aribo on the pitch, if you then take Ramsey off the pitch, you've got very little. You're not going to score many goals, are you?
Well, see, I disagree with that. So to me, their and again, I haven't talked about this that much because not that anyone listens to what I say, but relative to what they do, I try to hold back some of what I think. And for me, because of their creativity deficit, the pathway for them against us is to create chances off of turnovers, like they were doing almost endlessly in the first half. Okay, so why do you not optimize for the press to challenge us in that horrible weakness that we have that they did expose, even with Ramsey as their central defending midfielder in that setup, right? So if you put Kamara in there, or even better yet, put Aribo there and put Sakala out on the right? So they played Aribo out of position and diluted his effectiveness, which was crap. He was terrible in the game too. And they compound that, putting a guy in the middle of the pitch that we all know the issues with fitness and sharpness, and he's not a pressing dynamo anyway. It was so stupid that they went that direction, and God bless them for doing it. But had they not, like those simple two little tweaks, I could have seen them almost endlessly giving us problems for us trying to get the ball out. Because even with those people in the positions that they were, I mean, they were choking us in getting out from our defensive half. I mean,
listen, I mean, you're talking about I think we're letting the first 7 minutes kind of blind. It wasn't the whole first half. Yeah, at half time, the XG was 1.42 to 0.38. Right, they had a Balogun header from a corner, and other than that, it was long range shot. They did nothing in that first half.
I'm not talking about XG. I mean, that again, this is why I document these, attacking platforms situation. I got that from the Canadian national team coach, right? It's something that they do. I heard it on a podcast a while back. And I think it's an interesting concept, which is basically when you get the ball in a certain position it's kind of like a merge between pack passing and taking out defenders, and then getting into a point where you have a platform to attack, right? Where you have either a number superiority against the back line in a dangerous area, and like the attacking third. And this is what I'm saying. They basically in the first half were like 4-1 on that kind of metric compared to us. And a lot of that came from turnovers, and it was outside. You're right. I mean, the clustering of this, that's why the first 7-8 minutes was a nightmare. But it didn't, in my view, it didn't get appreciably better. I mean, it improved. It went from nightmare to just kind of not good. And so again, this is why it's good to have a good manager, is because he did something about it, right? This is why, so the end point here, the end of the story is good. I'm just trying to analyze what actually happened. And to me, if we'd have kept playing like we did in the first half, I think it would have been a really unwise move. And that's why we have a smart manager who's maybe a great manager who made the adjustments, and we got the win as a result, I think.
Mm-hmm. Shall we talk about Celtic, because we sound like a couple of angry bears over here?
Oh no, it's,
there are a number of Celtic players that we could focus on. I mean, Cameron Carter-Vickers, the fridge is what the Celtic players are calling him, and rightly so. I thought Carl Starfelt was excellent as well in the role that he was playing. Greg Taylor surprised me. I thought he was quite good. And again, now I'm not looking at it in an analytical way the same way you are. I'm just watching on TV. I thought Greg Taylor stood out as a player that deserved praise after the game. Maeda as well, everywhere. As always, I thought this was the game where Celtic fans really saw what he is there for and what he can do. But I want to start with Tom Rogic, because he was a player that was focused in on this podcast before the game. I know Ross from Boys Analytics would have preferred to see Matt O'Reilly in there, but Tom Rogic gets his goal. And to me, it stands out, and his comments in the interview after the match still stand out to me as an important thing to keep in mind, in that he was a player that knows how to win a title and knows what the pressure is like to be on top and have a chasing pack come after you. And in terms of the midfield, Cal McGregor was excellent again, but Hatate looked a little bit headless at the time. So I thought to have Tom Rogic in there to start with the experience in midfield, I thought that was a wise move from Ange, and it is one that paid off for sure anyway.
Yeah, as I say, he was easily the most effective attacking player on the pitch in the time that he was on the pitch. And I did a piece today comparing his numbers to Ramsey. And just as an aside, it's quite hilarious when you see some of the stats sites. There's a lot of stats sites now that give you quite a lot of data for free for those that are interested in getting and doing some of this stuff yourself. Is that Ramsey and Rogic were rated using their rating systems almost identically, and yet if you actually look at their performance data, other than the fact that they obviously rate somebody massively highly when they score a goal, and that kind of has such a weighting to it that they ignore all the other data. They go the other 99% of the data that they actually contributed to the game. So Rogic was easily more effective, despite the fact they both scored a goal. It was actually a nice reflection of their respective contributions, because Rogic was simultaneously Celtic's most effective attacker and, to James's point, the source of most of the risk that Celtic were experiencing in terms of defensive shape and positioning, because not because of him personally so much as the role that he was asked to play, where he was pushing forward so high and so centrally, as I say, to try and starve their midfielders getting the ball, and very effectively actually. But the risk was that we would then on transition leave these gaps in the middle of the field, as it turned out that cost the goal partly, but generally they didn't exploit that effectively other than that. So his contribution to the team was he did the job that he was asked to do, and he did it really well, because, as I say, of all the attacking players, the rest of the three attackers, if you like, had very little in the way of shots and XG and chances created. But what they all did with Jota, Giakoumakis and Maeda was just exceptional work rate off the ball, absolutely exceptional work rate. And they, Rogic is buying each of those three a pint, at some point, because they gave him the platform for him to do his stuff on the ball through the work that was going on off the ball from those three.
Well, that's the thing about Tom Rogic, and we've done a couple of pieces on him across the year or two that we've been doing this podcast, and I've always said Tom Rogic is my favorite player for Celtic, because he can produce absolute moments of magic. He really can. He's an exceptional talent, but he is what you would put into the same bracket lazily as a luxury player, because you do need those players like Maeda, Giakoumakis and Jota to do the dirty work that he can't do or won't do, or I mean, he has done it to an extent this season, James. But if you give a player like Rogic the platform to perform, he's shown already that he can still do it at this point. So I think he's been incredibly important for Celtic this season.
Yeah, I think as Alan adeptly pointed out, the way that Ange decided to play made his selection over O'Reilly, I think, a slam dunk. Meaning that if you're going to have that attacking 8 almost in like a 10 role, I think that's kind of tailor-made for Rogic. And so, having said that, I mean, that makes sense, right? So based off how the manager decided to set up and play, that was the way to go from a selection perspective. Again, the benefit of having a good manager, having coherence there. And so, yeah, I mean, his movement, his ability to be in space and receive the ball, I mean, that was, probably, as Alan said, I mean, it was probably the most important part of the first half. I mean, we and that the goal, the first goal, I mean, it was just a great sequence of play with a little bit of luck thrown in, and a deliciously horrible keeper error. So yeah, he was now the one thing I'll say is that the Magic Man, his passing was not great. So that was the one thing, if you think about Rogic and how we oftentimes consider him as being that creative force in the attacking third, it wasn't really that. Actually, he was pretty poor in his passing overall. It was more so his movement and ability to find those pockets and drag defenders out. So yeah, it was great. And it's I go back to this idea of just when you see things get done in a way that makes sense, it's so heartening, good or bad, right? So you can make, as I would say, you can have the debate about whether or not that was the right way to set up, but at least it makes sense. And to me, that puts Rogic in a position to play the way he should and highlights his positives. And he certainly paid back his manager for making that decision.
Yeah, I liked his celebration as well. It was subdued. It was very much just like, right, let's go. We're back in it. Let's get a second, and let's.
There might have been a reason for that.
Offside. No. What's your theory?
He was too busy dropping glass on the field before the shot, or what?
Given the behavior and the circumstances of the game and the behaviors on display, perhaps it was wise not to get people too excited.
Yeah, that's fair. For all the data, I'm going to bring some intangibles. That goal doesn't happen without Cal McGregor being absolutely just forceful and determined not to lose possession in that situation. And it was an unbelievable run. I just can't get my head around the idea that people think there are better centre midfielders in Scotland at the minute than Cal McGregor. I think all round, in terms of ball play, attitude, positional, like adjusting to different positions, I can't see anybody in Scotland that's better than Cal McGregor at the midfield, at being a general midfielder.
Yeah, I mean, he put in a ton of work. I mean, he had 12 sort of duels he was involved in, which is one of the top numbers. 7 that he was successful in. 17 recoveries was the most in the team. 4 clearances as well. He only really completed 32 passes, 80%. Not fantastic. Didn't do a lot in terms of. He did have one key pass, I guess. But again, it was like a lot of people in the team. It was a more of a team game, very much a team effort, really. I mean, if you look at the whole sort of package of data at the individual player level for the game, the 2 numbers that stand out more than any other numbers are the amount of pressures that Giakoumakis and Maeda applied to their defenders. That was just like off the scale levels of work of pressing the opposition and not giving them a moment to build the game. And that was it. That kind of epitomised the way that the team is set up. I mean, Maeda contributed virtually nothing in an attacking sense, and yet was absolutely fundamental to Celtic winning the game by defending from the front.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of people
and Jota as well. I mean, it was all
both,
three.
Both. Yeah.
All 3, even Jota. I mean, to a lesser degree, but for him, it's like sliding scale. I mean, just yeoman's work in doing that.
The two players who were involved in the most duels for Celtic were Giakoumakis and Maeda. Okay, the forwards. Okay, it was just ludicrous amounts of work right there.
Yeah, a lot of people have been in touch with us asking, do we know how much distance Maeda covered? We don't, because we don't have access to his GPS. But do you want to take a stab at it, Alan? Do you want to guess?
I had no idea. But listen, we're talking about Maeda, right? But the most defensive actions by any Celtic player, was Giakoumakis with 24. Okay. Maeda was fourth, actually, on 17. Giakoumakis had more challenges and interceptions than Maeda. He had one more pressure than Maeda. Maeda's pressures led to slightly more regains, so there was just 7.5 regains off of Maeda's pressures and 6.6 off of Giakoumakis's. But actually, if anything, Giakoumakis's defensive efforts were even more noteworthy.
Yeah, especially for a big man like Giakoumakis. He was speaking in front of the media today, by the way, and he was asked about his comments about winning the title and better players and Ryan Jack's rebuttal of it, rather. And he just doubled down, don't back down, double down, as they say. He said, "Look, I just think we're better players," and like most of us probably assumed, he was just being confident within his teammates and just knows how good this team are. So hopefully he's correct. By the end of the season, they'll be lifting the title, and he will be proven correct and not disrespectful to Ryan Jack. Before we go on to the defense,
I think that's a good answer, don't you?
I think it's a pretty good answer. Yeah. I mean, look, the game for me was won when Ryan Jack was in front of the media and he was staring down at his feet talking about Giakoumakis. I mean, it's just
don't hilarious. He's not the brightest kid. I mean, come on. he can't help what he was born with, can he?
He looks shell shocked at the sight of it. Anyway, before we move on to the defense, I would recommend, if anybody wants a good visual aspect of this, to take a look at Kieran Devlin's piece on The Athletic, because I thought he did a really good breakdown of the Celtic defense and visualizing it. And it was essentially what Livingston have been doing to Celtic for the last number of years. It was, in very simple terms, it was just being as compact as possible, not letting the midfield through and forcing them out wide and saying, cross the ball, we'll clear it all. So do you want to talk us through the defense from Cameron Carter-Vickers to Starfelt and their impact on the game?
Yeah, I mean, again, to me, it's a tale of two halves, meaning that the first half, they were, outside the first 7-8 minutes, I'd say competent defensively, but a little frightening in possession. And in the second half, when they were put in that role that really is tailor-made for both of them, you know what I mean? You could have put Julian in that role too, right? Which is basically defend your box. And we've talked about that with both of these guys. That, I mean, they're really good at that.
Could Shane Duffy have done it?
Yeah, absolutely. Second half was made for Shane Duffy.
Absolutely. Yeah. So again, back to Ange and the management team, we'll give them all credit, is Rangers did not have the personnel on the pitch to combat that. I mean,
Or the
bench, right? Exactly. So they don't really have somebody that's aerially dominant in attack. Even their center backs, they threw. They pulled the old Lennon playbook out and throwing the Goldson up top. And he's not particularly good in the air either for a center back. You know what I mean? Like the amount of chances that he gets to head the ball and score, not so great. So they don't have really any kind of aerial dominance. So we basically said, try and beat us that way. And it was, cross after cross after cross. And again, it was not a large number, but there were a couple of chances where, had they had a better cross, I think of one in particular, and to Alan's point earlier, I mean, Bassey was really good in the game. He actually, by most metrics, he was by a good distance their best player. And he put in one cross late that was, a little short, even though well shaped, and that was the big one that Giakoumakis cleared out, and understandably and justifiably got good credit for that. but both Starfelt and Carter Vickers were pretty much mispositioned on it. And there was a guy at the 6 yard at the penalty spot, and another guy, maybe 3 yards behind him, that had the ball been about a foot higher were right there. So, that's the chances that you take when you lob in 40 crosses or whatever it was, that at some point one of them happens to find a head. And so we're fortunate that the relatively small number that we didn't have every single guy covered, didn't turn into a decent chance for him. So yeah, it was a great bunkering performance.
Joe Hart pulled off a good save in the second half as well from a shot just inside the box, I think. I can't remember who took the shot.
Sakala.
Alan,
Yep.
It's Sakala. Alan, what was your general thoughts on the defending? Did you have data or like for headed duels or anything in the box that?
Well, as James said, I mean, a little interesting sidebar to this, and this is about expected goals, so it's relevant to what you're asking me, is that my very crude model actually kind of overinflated, I think, for this game, the Rangers XG up to 1.5, I think I had it as, or maybe not that much, but yeah, 1.5. And the reason for that mainly was because a couple of chances that Roof had that were very central and quite close to goal. One which he volleyed over the bar, one which he was leaning back and heading. Now the StatsBomb model had only had them as 0.89 xg, and the reason for that is because it takes into account the height of the ball as it's coming in and the amount of pressure that the player's under. So I think my model overstated the quality of their chances. So really 0.89 of which I think 0.3 of it was in the first half. So 0.6 xg they got out of that second half from as James says. I think in the second half there was like 32 crosses in the second half. There was about 9 in the first half. I spent the second half screaming at people, get out to the ball, get out to the ball, get out to the ball, like an idiot, right? Because because Tavernier is a good crosser, right? You don't want to give him time to control the ball, look up, shape a cross in. I'm thinking, come on, get out to the guy, get out to him, get out to him, get out. And we were quite slow getting out and blocking these crosses, but if you want to understand why Postecoglou might be genius, there's an interview with Callum McGregor after the game, and I can't remember if it's on Celtic TV or whether it's I don't know where. I can't remember where I saw it. And Callum McGregor describes how Celtic played in that second half, and he talks about a medium block, and he talks about the shape of the team, and he talks about the approach. And what that said to me is footballers aren't generally the brightest, but what it says to me is it's like the old Einstein thing, that if you can't explain it to somebody else, then you don't really understand it. What Postecoglou does is he makes things simple for his players, and we've touched on this time and time again as we've gone through the season. It's a theme. And what he does, he makes the game simple for players, and players like that. They really do appreciate that. And actually, it takes genius to simplify things and not make it complicated. Guardiola can make it infinitely complicated because he's got almost infinite resources with which to do it. And if £100 million pound player isn't doing what he thinks in his incredibly overthinking mind his team should be doing, he's got another £100 million player to bring off the bench to have a go at it, right? So most 99% of managers don't have that luxury. So if you can make the task simple for your players, and that's both in terms of clearing their minds of clutter as well as making the tactical approach simple, then with a half decent bunch of professionals like Livingston, for example, you're going to do a decent job, right? You really are. And he's obviously got far more resources at his disposal than what they do at Livingston. So that to me was the main takeaway, and because when I ended up capturing the data, I knew people would want to know about Carter Vickers and about Rogic and what did they do as individuals, and it is interesting. And the Maeda Giakoumakis stuff is actually the most interesting, for me personally. But the most important takeaway for me is just the extent to which the team ethic, the team culture, the team shape, the team dynamics, the organization, the purpose is being embedded more strongly week by week by week, and that's why Celtic will win.
Well, that's the bonus of a system play, and I've sort of spoken about the downside of a system in which that if one cog or 3 cogs, for example, don't work, then it can have a systemic issue in terms of what it does to the team. But if you have it all clicking, then those weaker cogs suddenly are not so noticeable anymore. Like, and I feel bad using this guy as an example because he's been exceptional this year, but he's the prime example of how this works, and that's Anthony Ralston. It's like, if you take him in, educate him in one specific thing that he has to do, rather than throwing him in saying defend, then if you tell him what to do, he'll figure he knows what to do. So he just needs to think about that. He doesn't need to think about how I'm impacting on Carter Vickers, how I'm impacting on the forwards. He just needs to do that one specific job. And I think that is what Ange does. He doesn't get the guys to do anything that's out of their wheelhouse. It's all planned to a T. One player has 3 or 4 specific jobs. You do them jobs and the whole team will click.
Yeah, there aren't too many Jimi Hendrix, right? So, but there are a lot of people that can be technically proficient studio musicians, right? So when you have the genius, let's call it, or the really smart guy is the band leader, you just need proficient people, and he'll write the music. He'll put people in the positions and instruct them as far as what to do. And if he's really good at it, as Alan said, doing it in a communication strategy that's going to make it easily digestible. And this is where I keep coming back to it. I mean, that to me is over and over again what we see with Ange is that the competency to / really smart decisions that get made, and the adjustments he made Sunday is an example, the selections that he made relative to how he wanted to play. Guys that were, even to Alan's point, that we, some of the criticisms that we've had earlier in the season, even substitution patterns. He got Hatate out of there maybe a little later than I'm guessing Alan probably would have wanted him to be, but the hook was not late this time. It was, he should have been out.
But sorry, James, just a little Biton's numbers actually were incredible.
Exceptional.
Considering he was only on the pitch 28 minutes. He won more challenges than any other player.
and not only that, again, back to how we were playing, who better do you want in that position out of the pool of players to make that substitution than putting Biton where he was put and then sliding McGregor out to where he was put, right? Made sense. And it was, and they performed given the way that we were playing in the game conditions that were the game environment at the time. So yeah, it was like to me, it was like a managerial orchestra that was put in play. And I think a lot of people understandably give the players a lot of credit, and they deserve credit, obviously. But to me, it was really, they were proficient. Most of them did what you would expect them to do, but we had someone that put them in position to do it and made the adjustments when they needed to be made. And by comparison to the other team, it was like, a 10-foot giant versus someone who's not 10 foot.
You're saying Van Bronckhorst is not
No,
10
I didn't
foot.
say that. Don't you? Don't be like that. I said he's not 10 foot, which is accurate.
Only facts on the show. Only facts. So look, what this means is very simply Celtic are 6 points ahead, having been 6 points behind in the driving seat. They've got Rangers in the Scottish Cup semi-final next week. If Celtic win that, they're on for the treble, which is absolutely exceptional compared to where we were last season. But if Celtic do win that surely is the demoralizing result for Rangers, the nail in the coffin for the rest of the season, because that means Celtic have their number completely. And for me, that if I was playing for Rangers and Celtic beat me next week in the Scottish Cup semi-final, I would be demoralized. I would be thinking they're better enough, they're going to win the league.
I mean, according to a lot of their podcasters and pundits, a lot of their players have dialed out, which we kind of knew anyway. I mean, not being smart, just you recognize it because we've lived through it ourselves last year. We had a core of players, our best players, probably, arguably, Ayer, Christie, Edouard, Incham, who really were looking for their next move, and I believe they're in the same position with a core of their players. I cannot potentially we cannot underestimate the impact of that, whether we lose the semi-final or not, the impact of that result on Sunday. If you look at their squad, and I'm sorry we're talking about them again, but if you look at their squad, you look at the number of players that are going to leave in the summer. Okay, like Goldson, they're getting nothing for. He's 26.
Morelos.
Okay, Morelos has got a year left on his contract. So the three most marketable players, Morelos, Kent, and Aribo, have got 1 year left on their contracts. Okay, and they're all 25 years old. So their next contract is the big one, right? And it'll be even bigger if they're getting a big signing on fee, because there's very little transfer fee involved. Okay, and that's before you touch on the massive amount of experience that's about to walk out the door, as well, and then you've just got an incredibly difficult rebuilding job there. Now, Celtic were in a similar position this year, but the advantage Celtic had was, on top of COVID, they had £30 million in the bank, and they were able to realise value for the assets that I mentioned, Ayer, Edouard, etc. So Postecoglou has been able to completely overhaul the squad whilst bringing in 40 million and spending roughly 20 million. Okay, that's how you do a rebuild. Now, fortunately, we've got somebody who's coherently been able to recruit players that fit the system he wants to play. That's not a given, and we've seen with Van Bronckhorst, tactically, in 2 games against Celtic, he's been really poor. So can he spot a player? We don't know yet. So, and that's before we even get into the financial state of the club. And that's more James's bailiwick than mine, so I'll let him cover that one. But there have been some prominent blogs this week that are almost calling it in terms of this could be the end of the Charles Green experiment. Now I don't have data to go that far, but I think this could be a very, very significant turning point.
Yeah, I would say I'm less convinced on the echo of 2012 revisiting, but whether it will be a debilitating, this is why I characterize it as a potential tectonic plate shift, meaning that one of the issues that we were going to have if we didn't, I shouldn't say if we didn't, I'm going to jinx us, if we don't win the league, that extra kind of 20 to 25 million that kicks in from the Champions League is that basically covers us from an operating basis going into next season, meaning that without that money, we would have likely had to sell somebody. And that would have been exclusive of signing a CCV or a Jota. Okay. So we've been running an operating deficit of around 10 to 15 million a year in the post Champions League Rodgers era. Right. So we kind of built up this cash reserve on the back of those 2 seasons, and some player sales like Tierney. And then from there, it's basically been, a slow bleed until the pandemic hit, and then everything got cleaned out. And we almost started back from square one from a financial perspective. So heading into next season, without, selling a Kyogo or flipping Jota, as I've talked about, pay the 6 and sell them for 12, that kind of thing. That was going to be a kind of a 10 to 12 or maybe 15 million pound hole that would have had to have been filled in order to kind of just meet the operating budget to keep the wage bill where it's been at.
Yeah, right? and we're a well-run, well-commercialized club.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what this comes into is even if they're able to monetize some of the players that have the year left, they've been running at an operating deficit, and they've been financing it through debt to equity swaps. So they've almost right-sized that at a Europa League level, almost. Okay. But not quite sufficiently. So that's what the Patterson deal basically did, is it gave them a bridge up through the end of the season. So they might be able to kind of carry over with some player sales, but again, where are the resources then to buy and to keep the wage bill at a commiserate level? That's where I think it's probably unlikely. Meaning that do I think it's an administration issue? Probably not. I mean, they're going to have enough wiggle room, I think, unless they're going to need outside capital probably in order to kind of reboot right? So if they're going to want to fund a rebuild with a transfer payment budget, then that's probably where you get into they're going to need excess outside capital. It's not, in my judgment, it's not a solvency issue unless there's some other contingent liability.
But James, you're well. There are contingent liabilities.
Well,
we know
potentially.
Yeah.
Potentially.
No, there is one, right? We know that the Sports Direct one, it will land, right? That's not contingent. That's it's just a question of when and what the precise number is. That's done. Okay.
Right.
So, but what you're describing, as you always do, you're describing very rationally. Okay. But the situation that they're in is that the people running the club are first and foremost fans. They're supporters. Okay,
like most clubs, absolutely. It's why most clubs are run like disasters.
Exactly, and that's why you don't generally have fans running clubs, because sometimes you have to make decisions that are unpopular with your customer base, and that does. And look at what the debacle around the Sydney Cup. Okay, it's pander.
Yep.
Okay, and as Walter Smith rightly said, they will not tolerate, a plucky second to Celtic. That version of a Rangers that is running an economic model commensurate with this actual size of their club, okay, is not acceptable to their customers.
Right.
And that's the bind that they're always going to be in. Because what they've now almost equaled Celtic's wage bill with a fraction of the commercial income and less ticket and football money coming in, because the stadium's 10,000 seats smaller.
No, agreed. But that's why.
So there is a club there to be ran on a sustainable basis. That means there isn't going to be an insolvency event. Absolutely, 100%. But how many of their supporters will accept that?
Agreed. But again, this is why I go back to why the gamble that they made relative to winning the league this year was in some ways reasonable relative to potential. I'm not saying it would have happened. I'm saying it would have potentially endowed that reaching of financial sustainability. Okay. So that would have given them the pathway to do that. Now for them to get there, they're going to need excess outside capital in order, to your point, to not have some kind of transition year, right? Where they basically say, okay, we're going to do a lot of freeze. We're going to have a very small transfer budget, and we're going to sell the people that we can sell that's not nailed down, and basically maybe sell a youth player that we can, you know what I mean? Like they've got some levers to pull that could, if they were saying, okay, we're going to get, because let's be practical about this. Like if I'm a serious person at Rangers, I'm looking at an Ange Postecoglou side that might get, another 10 to 15 million to spend this summer and still be financially in decent shape. Meaning that that's not pushing the boundaries, that's being within the realm of prudence. What's my probabilities spectrum of winning the league next year? It's not going to be good. So, do you placate the mob by throwing money down the toilet? So that's going to be that's the good part. We push them to that point of having to make that decision. My thing is,
they can't do the equity swap forever. I mean,
well, they can.
In theory, but these people are essentially
right.
These people are essentially plundering their own.
Well, right.
So
this is where I have more of a macro view, because what I do for my day job is we're in deep trouble. Europe's in deep trouble from a financial and an economic perspective here, probably in the next 12 to 18 months, in my judgment anyway. And so you got a lot of these people that have been funding clubs, and this is broader. This is a pan-European issue. This is not just at Rangers. Clubs financing through fans basically, who's have their risk assets in their portfolios going berserk for the last 10 years, ever since the global financial crisis. So what happens if their risk assets go down another 30-40% from here? How much are they going to be willing to pony up that 5 million, that 3 million to pop into the club, knowing that it's getting flushed down the toilet? So it's means versus wants. And I think we're moving into a regime of, a lot more means in the next 12 months. So this is why I say that there's a lot of potential here for bad decision making. and they certainly have a track record of doing that. I'm just saying that it's not likely to be acute. It's not likely to be going into next season where we're going to all have fun like, we did a decade ago.
Let's talk about more immediate things, because St. Johnstone are up this week. I should say exciting news for the channel over the next couple of weeks. After the split, which is now technically a race to the title or run to the title, I've set up a couple of previews and stuff with other Celtic podcasts. So we're going to be joined by the guys from Endless Celts. We're going to be joined by the Celtic Exchange, Ryan Fitzsimons from the Celtic, the Thunder, Glasgow's Green podcast, Hamish from 67 Hill. They will all be on the Breakdown Inc. over the course of the 6-week period or the 4-week period in which Celtic will play 6 games in the run-in to the title. So if you want to get all that, you can subscribe to the channel and you'll get notified when those videos are live. So just finishing up real quickly, St. Johnstone this weekend, it seems like almost back to reality after a long period of Celtic Rangers stuff, old firm stuff. It's the old firm, guys. Did you know it's the old firm? It's definitely the old firm until your sign goes into the bin telling you that it's the old firm after you get defeated. So St. Johnstone this weekend, what are we doing?
Well, I'm nursing my crippling insecurity. I don't know about you.
First thing, a shout out. There's an account on Twitter, St. Johnstone Analysis. He does a good job. So if you're looking for a brush up on St. Johnstone, they've had an uptick in form recently.
Yep.
Their perpetual problem this season has been one of chance creation and scoring. So I think it's is it Hendry? Callum Hendry,
Hendry, yeah, he's up to 6 goals. In the league.
So he's had a bit of a good stretch here. To me, it's going to be back to the future here. So we're going to go back to more of a Livy type of game, most likely, and it's going to be a bunkered opponent, and can we figure out a way through? And so hopefully it's another game for Giacomakis. Hopefully they don't get any set pieces, you know what I mean? Score on their 1 or 2 chances the whole game. Should be one of those types of games where we dominate and just overwhelm. This should be the kind of an opponent where it's very controlled and relatively straightforward. But having said that, they've been playing better. And again, it's the underlying metrics have suggested that too, meaning that they've been getting a little bit better, and they've had some transfers in January. I think that have helped. Malberg, I think. So I think they're better than they've been prior in the season, but hopefully it should be comfortable.
Yeah, they've only lost 3 of the last 8, which is good form for the way it was going for them. They've settled on as James said, they're gonna have 3 centre backs stationed along the 6-yard box, 3 big guys. We've seen this movie many times before. Interesting twist might be they're on quite a few points ahead of Dundee now. Now, obviously, I'm just need to check where they are as regards.
I think they're still a good bit behind St. Mirren, though.
Yeah, they're 6 points behind St. Mirren, so they wouldn't be dragged into a playoff potentially, and they are 6 points ahead of Dundee. So that suggests to me they'll probably be conservative. I was just wondering in my mind whether they could see the game as a free hit, like if they went for it and won the game, it's like happy days. If they lose, it's really not such a biggie. But I think they'll want to make sure that they stay well ahead of Dundee, because that's relegation. So I suspect it's going to be all out defence. It's going to be it's going to be a low block. It's 3 centre backs at the back. It's going to be another 2 defensive players on the flanks, and it's going to be can we break them down? But what we've seen against Livingston, against Ross County, and to an extent against Dundee United is we've got a lot more variety now, a lot more ways to unpick teams like this. Maeda's diagonal runs, his Maeda or Abada arriving in the box late. Giacomakis can do the brute strength thing, just get the ball to him anywhere in the box, at any angle, at any height, and providing he doesn't have to take a touch to control it, it's probably going to be a goal, that sort of thing. So we've got more armory now. We've got a stacked bench. So I think it'll be tough. I think it'll be, a doer, but hopefully we'll get the job done.
Yeah. Out of the remaining fixtures, I mean, we don't quite know what the post split will look like. I mean, that's going to be fascinating this weekend to see how that all shakes out.
Praying Motherwell make it.
Yeah, Motherwell. Yeah, absolutely. Motherwell over Aberdeen for sure.
Oh God.
But I mean, this game and then probably the Hearts game are the two that I would be most nervous about. If I have to say rank them, which ones would I have more anxiety about dropping points potentially? Like, this is one of those games where I could see us shoot 25, 30 times and somehow it's a 0-0 draw. Like that, in the grand scheme of things, the probability of that, I think, is higher than us drawing against a Motherwell or a Hibs or that kind of thing.
So James, I mean, Hearts are 14 points clear in second place. They'll be on holiday. I mean, I'm not saying they'll be professional. They'll be tough because they love playing Celtic and all that good stuff. But Suter's still injured, etc. There's not. I mean, the Hearts gave Celtic a great game when if they'd won the game, they would have gone above Celtic into second place. This is a very different situation. This is why these games, we talked about sort of pre-split, pro-split. Sometimes post-split, you get some pretty one-sided games because once you get into the top six and then you can't move, some teams there's not a lot in it for them. But before the split, everybody's got something to play for, and every position matters. And all these games have been really tough. And that's why there's been some unexpected drop points going on. But sometimes when you get post split, you think, oh, you're playing all the big teams, but they've got literally nothing to play for here.
Right.
And that makes that little 1%. It's just 1 or 2% less on it is enough to make the game more comfortable for your opponent.
Well, I think that if that'll be a home game, I think, right?
Hearts is home, yeah.
Right.
Well, it should be. Yeah.
Right. Well, right.
From your lips.
I know. That'll be interesting. That might be the telltale sign whether there's some.
Well, it's going to be screwed up anyway, and it didn't have to be. And I've written about this because they stacked it. They stacked it wrongly from the start, right? Anyway, I'll say no more.
Yeah, we shall wait and see. All I'm hoping is that the high of winning again against Rangers away won't impact this result. They won't be tired emotionally going into this. Hopefully,
they've had a week to cry about, to celebrate. Yeah,
exactly. Right, that shall do it. It's just over an hour worth of content over the derby, and look, there's plenty to get into over the next couple of weeks. The title is not won yet, but hopefully we are on the way to another league title under Ange Postecoglou. James, Alan, pleasure as always.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Enda. Thank you.
Right, we'll chat to you next week. Good luck.